Hello and welcome back. So the last video on weathering, I wanted to talk about final weathering. So what we have at this point, we've talked about general prep work where we use the Bondo and the primer and we get it to a silver finish using silver paint, black first, then silver. Then we talked about the painting and masking section where you use toothbrush, or toothpaste rather, or mustard, and masking tape to mask out specific areas that you then clean off later. Okay, now in order to give it that sort of old and beat up look like this one, we're going to be doing one final step that uses two basic products. Okay, the first of them is Rub and Buff. Now, Rub and Buff is a wax-based paint. It's fairly easy to obtain. It comes in tiny little tubes. That's not really a problem because a little bit of this stuff goes a very long way. Right? I've made an entire suit of Mandalorian armor, and I think 3 lightsabers, and I've only used this much of the tube. All right, the other thing that we're going to be using is flat black acrylic paint. Now, this is relatively easy to obtain from any craft store or department store, but you're just looking for black acrylic paint. It's water-based so that you can water it down. All right, so first thing that we do with the Rub and Buff is I recommend put a little bit on a paper towel and then rub that paper towel against itself so that you sort of smooth it out. The last thing you want is a clump of Rub and Buff because it sticks to your material and it spreads out in all directions. We want a very thin coat on that paper towel. And then what you do is anywhere that there are edges that would experience wear, like here or here, what I did was I just took that towel and very lightly went like this across those edges. Then on the faces, after I've used some of that stuff off of the paper towel, then I can go to the faces and sort of hit it with some scuffs, just in the direction that I want it to appear. All right, so you can see here in the corner, that's Rub and Buff right there. All right, after you get the Rub and Buff on, it dries pretty dang quick. So the next step is going to be to use the acrylic paint. So you can use the acrylic paint just as is, but I recommend that you water it down. Because if you water it down, it's really going to get into all the nooks and crannies of your of whatever it is that you're weathering. All right, so water it down about 50-50 usually, 50% paint, 50% water. And then what you're going to do is you're going to paint the entire thing, just over the entire thing, black. Okay, what this is going to do is it's going to unify your weathering so that the parts that are shiny aren't shinier than the parts that aren't as shiny. Your hammer tone's not going to be as shiny as things like your Rub and Buff. So the black just sort of ties it all together and gives it this sort of grungy, tarnished look. So you just paint the entire thing. Okay, and then what you're going to do is come back in after you've got it all painted. And don't worry, this paint will not dry very quickly. So you've got plenty of time to work with it. You want it to dry at least a little bit so that it sticks in some places. But come back in with a paper towel. Dry paper towel is fine. You don't need a wet one because you've already added water to the paint. And what you do is you just wipe it off in the direction that you want the wear to happen. If you've got a 3D printed piece, I recommend pretty much all weathering go perpendicular to the 3D print lines because you're still going to be obscuring those things even towards the end. All right, so for this one, I rubbed it off this direction. Okay, places where you want buildup, like in the cracks here, make certain that you don't rub all of your paint out of there. Take a light touch and leave some buildup in the crevices where you want it. Okay, the black paint is going to hang in the corners of the paint that you had or that you took off with the mustard or toothpaste weathering. So it'll create a good contrast between the silver and the red, in my case. It's also going to tie the whole thing together and give it that sort of beat up look. Anywhere that you've built in damage as well. Let me see, here we go. There's some built-in damage right there with the coffee weathering. Anywhere that you've done that, the black is going to sink into that and it's really going to bring that weathering forward as well. All right, so all things told, you've gone from 3D print to really nice, beat up looking, this thing looks like it walked off of a battlefield armor. This is not the only technique for weathering, but it is the one that I've sort of pieced together over time, so hopefully that's helped. One last thing I would add is that when you're doing your own weathering, you can play with the technique a little bit. There is a way, after you put that metallic silver on there and then you put a hammer tone on top of it, I've done things like take some masking tape and just use the sticky before the hammer tone dries and pull off chunks. Okay, that's some of what I did on the faceplate of my helmet. Okay, you can use the coffee weathering on top of the hammer tone and then scrape it off, and it leaves some interesting looking darker pitted areas. So get creative and experiment with things. Experiment with smaller patches where you can control stuff, but you'll come up with some good results every now and then. You'll find your own tips for weathering. This is just a jumping off point to show you what I used. All right, hopefully this has been of use. If it has, join me back for more. See you next time.